When I first saw the cabin on the side of Maple Ridge Mountain, I thought it was the kind of place you only see on postcards. Tall pines wrapping the property in green silence, snow-dusted peaks reflecting in the glassy lake below, and a winding dirt road that seemed to lead not just away from town but away from the world itself. It had a worn-out for sale sign leaning against a fence, half buried in mud. The online listing had called it a fixer-upper with potential. That was an understatement. The roof sagged like a tired old man's shoulders, the porch steps were broken, and ivy had claimed half the outer wall. But to me, it was perfect, a chance to start over, rebuild something with my own hands, and find peace after 2 long years of losing everything that mattered. I had just finalized my divorce a few months earlier. My old house had been sold, my job was remote now, and my world felt empty. So, when I stumbled across this mountain property at a shockingly low price, it felt like fate. I called the realtor, a man named Gary, who assured me it was a legitimate sale. The previous owners, he said, had passed away years ago, and the cabin had been tied up in probate until recently. "You'll be the first owner in nearly a decade," he told me. "It's got good bones, and that view alone is worth the price." I signed the paperwork within a week, wired the payment, and received the deed in my name. For the first time in years, I felt excited, truly, wildly excited, about something again. The drive up the mountain was long but beautiful. I had packed my old pickup with tools, paint, and a few boxes of essentials. My plan was to camp in the cabin while fixing it up room by room. The gravel road wound higher until trees gave way to a clearing, and there it was, my mountain home. Even in its weathered state, it felt alive, like it was waiting for me. The first few nights were magical. I cleaned out the dust, replaced a few window panes, and lit a fire in the old stone fireplace. The crackle of wood, the chill of mountain air, and the faint scent of pine sap. Everything felt right. I told myself that this would be my new beginning. But peace has a way of attracting chaos. It was on the 4th morning that I first saw them. I was fixing the fence by the front gate when a silver SUV pulled up. Out stepped a woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled hair and an expression like she'd just bitten into something sour. Behind her was a man, her husband, I guessed, and 2 teenagers who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. The woman marched toward me with the confidence of a general. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "What exactly are you doing on our property?" I blinked. "Your property? I think you must be mistaken. I bought this cabin 2 weeks ago." Her eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. This is my parents' old house. We've owned this land for 30 years. I took a deep breath, trying to keep things calm. "Look, I'm sorry for any confusion. The previous owners passed away. I purchased it legally through Maple County Realty. Here." I pulled out a folded copy of my deed from my jacket. "It's all here. My name's David Warren." She didn't even glance at the paper. "No. This is some kind of scam," she said. "My parents built this place with their own hands. We spent every summer here when I was a child. Just because the county records are a mess doesn't mean you can claim it." Her husband, a tall man with a permanent scowl, finally spoke up. "Karen, maybe we should check first. I know what I'm talking about, Mark," she snapped. Then she turned back to me. "We'll be back with proof." They got into their SUV and drove off, tires spitting gravel. I stood there, stunned. I'd dealt with difficult people before, but this woman, this Karen, had an intensity that made my skin crawl. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just emotional about her parents' old home. Once she saw the legal documents, she'd realize the truth. The next morning, I woke to noise, the rumble of a moving truck. My heart dropped as I looked out the window. Karen and her family were back, unloading furniture into my driveway. I stormed outside. "What the hell are you doing?" Karen didn't even look up from the box she was carrying. "We've decided to move back in. The county made a mistake selling it to you. This is our property." I felt my pulse spike. "You can't just move into someone else's house." She gave me a pitying look. "David, was it? You seem like a nice man. But this is a misunderstanding that's about to be cleared up. Until then, we're not going anywhere." Her husband avoided my eyes, muttering something about not wanting trouble. Their kids carried bags inside. I was so shocked I couldn't even move for a moment. I called the sheriff immediately. When he arrived, a stocky man named Deputy Collins, I handed him my paperwork, explaining the situation in detail. Karen stood beside him with crossed arms, smiling faintly as if she already knew the outcome. Collins took his time, reading through the documents. "Looks legitimate," he said at last. "Karen, unless you've got paperwork of your own, you and your family will need to leave." Karen's smile didn't fade. "I do have paperwork," she said smoothly. "It's at home in our storage unit. My father's will clearly states the property belongs to me." Collins sighed. "All right. You've got 48 hours to bring that proof. Until then, you'll need to stay off the property." Karen's eyes darkened. "You'll regret this," she hissed, then turned and stalked back to her SUV. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. The wind creaked through the rafters, branches tapped the windows, and somewhere in the forest an owl hooted. I told myself it was over, that she'd cool down and never return. But I underestimated her. 2 days later, I returned from a supply run to find the locks broken and the front door wide open. Karen's SUV was parked in the driveway again. I burst inside and froze. They'd moved in completely. Furniture, boxes, clothes, it was like they'd lived there for months. Karen stood in the kitchen, humming as she unpacked dishes. "What are you doing?" I shouted. "Get out of my house." She turned calmly, wiping her hands on a towel. "Our house," she corrected. "The county confirmed there was an ownership discrepancy. Until it's resolved, we're staying right here." "That's not true," I yelled. "You're trespassing." "Then call the sheriff again," she said with a smile. "Let's see what he says this time." I did call, but when Collins arrived, he looked uncomfortable. "David, I just got off the phone with the county clerk," he said slowly. "Apparently, there's some confusion in the property records. The deed was filed twice, once under your name, once under an old family trust tied to the Reynolds estate. That's Karen's maiden name." I felt like the air had been punched out of me. "So, what does that mean?" "It means until the county sorts it out, neither of you can legally force the other off the property." Karen smiled triumphantly. "See? I told you." I wanted to scream. "This is insane." Collins just sighed. "Sorry, son. Best thing you can do is let the lawyers handle it." So that's what I did. I hired a lawyer, sent official notices, and filed a claim for quiet title. It should have been simple, a matter of legal clarification. But Karen made it hell. She filled the place with noise, blaring music, yelling at her kids, barking orders. She parked her SUV to block my truck. At night, she'd bang on my wall and shout, "Turn off your lights. My kids are sleeping." I started sleeping in my car just to get peace. My dream of rebuilding the cabin had turned into a nightmare. Weeks passed. My lawyer, Amanda, called often with updates. "The paperwork is messy," she said. "But don't worry. The deed in your name is valid. We just need time." Time. That's what I didn't have. Because Karen wasn't just squatting. She was destroying the house. She ripped out the old fireplace because she didn't like the stone. She repainted the porch neon yellow. One afternoon, I caught her tossing my tools into the woods. When I confronted her, she smirked. "You're lucky I don't charge you for trespassing." By month 2, I was living in a motel down in town, driving up every few days to check on the place. Each time, things got worse. Trash piled up in the yard. Broken furniture littered the porch. She had even installed cameras on the front door, my front door, so she could monitor who came by. I started documenting everything, photos, videos, timestamps. My lawyer filed injunctions, but the court dates dragged on. Meanwhile, Karen acted like queen of the mountain, throwing parties and boasting to locals that she'd reclaimed her family home. Then came the night that changed everything. I drove up late after getting a call from a neighbor saying smoke was coming from the cabin. When I arrived, I saw the glow of flames licking at the kitchen window. I ran inside, shouting for anyone still there. Karen and her husband were outside, yelling and waving their arms. "It was the wiring," she screamed. "You didn't tell us this place was unsafe." I grabbed the fire extinguisher from my truck and rushed inside, choking on smoke as I sprayed down the flames. By the time the fire department arrived, most of the kitchen was ruined. The chief asked who owned the place. Karen started to speak, but I cut her off and handed him the deed. "I do," I said firmly. "And I want her charged for trespassing and property damage." That night, she was finally forced to leave. The investigation revealed the fire wasn't from bad wiring, it was from a candle left burning on the counter. Her negligence had nearly destroyed everything. With that evidence, the court fast-tracked my case. 2 weeks later, the judge officially ruled in my favor. The property was mine, and mine alone. When the verdict came down, I drove straight to the cabin. It was a mess. Walls blackened by smoke, furniture ruined, windows shattered. But it was quiet again. The kind of silence that felt sacred. I stood on the porch, breathing the mountain air, and let the weight of it all sink in. I'd fought for this place, for my peace, my sanity, and the right to start over. Karen had taken months of my life, but she couldn't take the mountain from me. I spent the next year rebuilding everything. I replaced the roof, sanded the floors, painted the walls. The fire had scarred the cabin, but it also gave me a clean slate. Every board I nailed down felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I still think I can hear Karen's voice echoing through the trees, sharp, entitled, defiant. But then I listen closer, and all I hear is the sound of pine needles rustling and the distant call of an eagle. Peace at last. But the mountain had one last secret. A few months after the court ruling, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in tight, shaky handwriting. Inside was an old photograph, a young woman, standing in front of the cabin decades ago. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "For Karen, summer 1986. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe she really did love this place once. Maybe her rage came from loss, not greed. I'll never know. But as I placed the photo in a drawer, I whispered, "It's home now. I'll take care of it." Today, the cabin stands strong again. The porch is new, the windows clear, the lake glimmering just beyond the trees. Every morning, I sit with a cup of coffee and watch the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Sometimes, peace isn't something you find, it's something you fight for. And I fought for mine with everything I had. When I first found the listing for the lake house, it felt like something out of a dream. A century-old cabin tucked deep in the woods, its porch overlooking still, dark waters that mirrored the sky like glass. The photos showed peeling paint, crooked shutters, and a roof sagging with age, but there was something magnetic about it. The kind of place that whispered stories instead of shouting them. I'd been looking for solitude. After my brother died in an accident 2 years earlier, the world felt too loud, too fast. So I quit my job, sold my apartment in the city, and drove north until the map turned from roads to forest trails. The house, the ad said, was in need of attention but rich in potential. I didn't care about the work. I cared about the silence. When I arrived, evening was falling. Mist hung low over the lake, blurring the reflection of the trees into ghostly shadows. The cabin sat at the edge of the water, half swallowed by vines. I unlocked the door and stepped into darkness. The air smelled of dust and pine resin, old wood and rain. I remember standing in the middle of the room, flashlight in hand, and feeling an odd sense of being watched, not with menace, but curiosity, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd stay. I stayed. For the first few weeks, everything went according to plan. I cleaned, repaired, painted. Each morning I woke to the sound of loons calling across the lake, and each night the forest filled with the rhythm of crickets and frogs. My days were quiet, perfectly quiet, until the day I found the photograph. It was behind the old fireplace, tucked into a crack in the stone. The picture was faded, edges curled with time. It showed a woman standing on the porch of the cabin, smiling. Her hair was long, dark, and wind-tangled. On the back, written in neat cursive, were the words, "To Eleanor, summer, 1972. There was something about her expression, confident but sad, that made me want to know more. Who was Eleanor? And who had given her this picture? That night, I dreamed of the woman. She was standing by the water's edge, her hair blowing in the wind, whispering something I couldn't hear. When I woke, the house felt colder than usual. The fire had gone out, and the mist outside was so thick it hid the lake entirely. I tried to shake the feeling off. Old houses had memories. That was all. But later that morning, as I walked down to the dock, I noticed something strange. Footprints, bare, wet footprints, led from the water to the porch. I told myself they were mine, though I knew they weren't. The next week brought more oddities. Tools went missing. Doors I was sure I'd locked stood open in the morning. Once, I heard soft humming from upstairs, the same tune I'd heard faintly in my dream. I went up, heart pounding, but the room was empty. I started to doubt myself. Maybe isolation was getting to me. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days, hadn't been to town since the day I arrived. The nearest neighbor was a mile away, and cell service was non-existent. So I forced myself to take a break. I drove into town, a small, sleepy place with one diner, a general store, and a post office. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. The woman behind the counter at the store looked surprised when I mentioned the lake house. "You're staying up there?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "You know about Eleanor, right?" I hesitated. I found a picture. Who was she? The woman lowered her voice. "Eleanor Hart. She lived there decades ago. Disappeared one night, just vanished. They never found her body. Folks said she drowned, but she trailed off and glanced toward the window. Others said she didn't leave the house at all. The drive back felt longer than usual. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone in the back seat. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was setting behind the trees, painting the lake in red and gold. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. On the kitchen table, lying neatly beside my cup of coffee, was the photograph of the woman. I had left it in the drawer upstairs. My breath caught. I stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "Eleanor?" The wind sighed through the trees outside, and I could have sworn I heard the faintest echo of laughter. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, staring at the lake. The surface was so still it reflected the stars perfectly, as if the sky itself had fallen into the water. And then movement. At first, I thought it was just ripples from a fish. But then I saw her. A figure, pale and slow-moving, stepping out of the water. Her dress clung to her skin, her hair dripping. Even from across the shore, I could see her eyes, hollow, searching. I blinked, and she was gone. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was imagination. Too many ghost stories, too much isolation. I threw myself back into work, sanding floors, repairing stairs, anything to keep busy. But the feeling didn't fade. The next day, while clearing the attic, I found something else, a stack of old letters tied with a ribbon, yellowed with age. They were written by a man named Thomas Green. Each one began with, "My dearest Eleanor." The letters spoke of plans, of running away together, of leaving the lake behind. But the last one was different. It was smudged, hurried, desperate. They found out. "I'm leaving tonight. Meet me by the dock at midnight. Don't tell anyone." The date was August 17th, 1972. The day Eleanor vanished. I don't know what possessed me to go to the dock that night. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something deeper, the sense that the story wasn't finished. Midnight came, and the moon rose over the lake, casting a silver path across the water. I stood at the end of the dock, the boards creaking beneath my feet. The air was still, silent. Then the water rippled. A shape emerged, faint, shimmering, like light beneath the surface. I stepped closer, peering down. And there she was, Eleanor. Her face was pale but beautiful, her eyes full of sadness. She raised a hand toward me, lips moving soundlessly. I reached out before I could stop myself, and the world tilted. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the shore, coughing up lake water. The dock was empty. In my hand, I was clutching a silver locket. Inside the locket was a tiny photograph of the same man from the letters, Thomas Green. On the opposite side, engraved in tiny script, were the words, "Forever by the water." I felt an ache in my chest, not fear, but sorrow. Whatever had happened that night in 1972, it hadn't been an accident. Someone had kept Eleanor from leaving. Someone had buried her story. The next morning, I went into town again. I showed the locket to the woman at the store. Her eyes widened. "That's Eleanor's," she whispered. "People search for it for years." "Do you know anyone named Thomas Green?" I asked. She frowned, thinking. "My grandmother used to talk about him. Said he worked at the logging camp nearby. Disappeared the same week Eleanor did." I thanked her and left, the locket heavy in my pocket. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what the letter had said. They found out. Who was they? And why had both of them vanished? I searched the property more carefully the next day. The woods behind the cabin were dense, the ground thick with moss and fallen leaves. About 100 feet in, I found something that stopped me cold, a half-buried wooden cross, so weathered it was almost part of the earth itself. No name.
No marker.
Just a crude cross facing the lake. I knelt beside it, brushing away the dirt. Eleanor. I whispered. A breeze stirred the trees, soft but insistent, and I swear I heard a woman's voice, faint, grateful, whisper, "Thank you." That night, I dreamed again. I was standing at the water's edge, the moon high and bright. Eleanor stood beside me, no longer ghostly but warm, real. She smiled, touching my shoulder gently. "You found me," she said. "He never made it. They stopped him before he reached the dock. But now we're free." "Who?" I asked. "Who stopped you?" Her expression darkened. "The ones who own this land. The ones who didn't want us to leave." She looked toward the forest. "But they're gone now. Only the lake remembers." When I woke, the air felt lighter. For the first time since I'd arrived, the cabin felt peaceful. The smell of smoke and dust was gone, replaced by something clean and new. The photograph that had haunted me was gone too, vanished from the table where it always appeared. Only the locket remained, resting on the windowsill. I left it there, open to the light. Months passed. The house was nearly finished, the walls painted, the roof repaired, the garden blooming again. I spent my mornings walking the trails and my evenings by the fire, reading the letters aloud to the empty room. It felt like a promise, a way to give voice to a love that had been silenced too soon. Sometimes, when the mist rolls in from the lake, I catch a glimpse of her, standing at the water's edge, watching. But there's no fear now, only peace. A year later, I decided to invite a historian from the county archives to visit. Her name was Clara, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who had spent decades researching local mysteries. When I told her about Eleanor and Thomas, she listened intently, then asked to see the letters and locket. After a long silence, she said, "I think I can tell you what happened." According to old records, the lake property had once belonged to the Hart family, a powerful name in the region. Eleanor was their daughter. Thomas was one of the hired workers on the estate. When her father found out about their plans to elope, he forbade her from leaving and fired Thomas. But that wasn't the end. The night she vanished, Clara said quietly, Thomas was arrested for trespassing near the lake. He was found dead in his cell the next morning. They called it suicide. She closed the locket gently. "Your house, it was the caretaker's cabin. Thomas's cabin." That night, I stood on the porch long after Clara left, staring at the moonlit lake. The truth felt heavy, but it also made sense. Two lives torn apart by cruelty, their love trapped between water and earth. I whispered into the darkness, "You're together now. Rest." The wind rustled the trees like a sigh of relief. Years have passed since then. I still live here, though the town calls me the hermit by the lake. I don't mind. The house is beautiful now, strong, alive, full of light. And every so often, on calm summer nights, I hear faint laughter from the dock. Two voices. Sometimes I see ripples spreading across the still water as if someone just stepped in, and I smile, because I know who it is. Love doesn't die. It just waits for someone to listen. When I first saw the house on Hollow Creek Road, I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for escape. After losing my job in the city and ending a 6-year relationship that had burned every ounce of joy from me, I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere untouched by everything I'd been running from. The house sat alone on a hill, surrounded by acres of untamed forest, its paint peeling, its porch sagging, and its windows clouded with dust. Most people would have seen an eyesore. I saw peace. The real estate agent, an older man named Wallace, warned me that the property had been vacant for nearly a decade. "People come and go," he said, avoiding my eyes. "No one stays long." When I asked why, he shrugged. "It's old, creaky, remote. Some say it's haunted, but that's just small-town talk." Haunted or not, I didn't care. The price was low enough, and the idea of solitude felt like salvation. I signed the papers the next day. Moving in was like stepping into another time. The wooden floors groaned under my boots, the wallpaper curled like dry leaves, and the scent of damp earth lingered in every corner. Still, I felt strangely at home. I told myself I'd restore it, repaint the walls, fix the roof, maybe even plant a garden. For the first few nights, I slept on a mattress on the floor, listening to the rain against the windows. The quiet felt alive, almost breathing. On the fifth night, I woke suddenly. The air felt heavy, charged. I thought I heard footsteps downstairs, slow, deliberate. Heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight and crept down. The living room was empty, but the front door stood wide open, swinging gently in the wind. I knew I had locked it. I stepped outside, scanning the darkness. The forest around the house was silent, suffocatingly so. The only sound was the creek at the bottom of the hill, whispering faintly over the rocks. I closed the door, locked it again, and told myself it was just the storm. Just wind. Just nerves. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found muddy footprints in the kitchen. They led from the door to the old pantry and stopped there. I checked every inch, nothing. Just shelves lined with dusty jars and a faint smell of rot. I tried to brush it off, but that night, the sounds returned. Footsteps. Then whispers. I began to wonder if Wallace's warning hadn't been a sales tactic, but a genuine plea. By the end of the week, I was exhausted. I barely slept. During the day, I worked to distract myself, sanding the floorboards, cleaning the attic, repainting the windowsills. It helped until I found the box. It was small, wooden, and wedged behind one of the attic beams. Inside were letters tied with a ribbon, browned with age. The handwriting was delicate, written in ink that had faded to a soft gray. The first letter was dated October 12th, 1954. Dearest Anna, it began, I don't know how much longer I can keep this secret. They've been watching the house again. Mother says I'm imagining things, but I know she's wrong. I can feel them at night, standing by the creek, waiting. I frowned. The next few letters spoke of the same fear, the watchers by the creek, the noises under the floor, the whispering at night. The final letter ended abruptly. If anything happens to me, look in the cellar. My hands trembled as I held it. I hadn't even known there was a cellar. The entrance was hidden behind the pantry shelves, a trapdoor barely visible under layers of dust. I pried it open and shined my flashlight down. Wooden steps descended into darkness. The air below was cold, damp, and thick with the smell of decay. Cobwebs clung to my face as I stepped down, the boards creaking beneath my weight. At the bottom, I found old tools, broken crates, and near the far wall, something carved into the wood. It was a message. They see you too. The light flickered. My heart slammed against my ribs. I scrambled up the stairs and slammed the trapdoor shut. For a long time, I sat on the kitchen floor, breathing hard, telling myself it was just an old prank, maybe carved decades ago by some teenager. But deep down, fear began to take root. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house changed. The silence grew heavier, almost watchful. Doors opened by themselves. I'd hear faint humming in the hallways. Once, I woke to find all the cabinet doors wide open, swinging gently as if moved by unseen hands. I called Wallace, the agent, demanding answers. There was a long pause before he spoke. I told you no one stays long, he said quietly. A family lived there in the 50s, the Langleys. Husband, wife, 2 daughters. They disappeared one winter. No sign of struggle, no bodies. Just gone. Folks around here said the house was cursed after that. But curses don't sell houses. Do you believe it's haunted? I asked. He hesitated. I believe the land remembers. I tried to leave the next morning. I packed my bags, loaded my car, and turned the key, nothing. The engine refused to start. The nearest mechanic was 20 miles away. I went back inside, frustrated and uneasy, planning to call for help when the storm passed. That night, the whispers were louder, closer. I woke to the creak of footsteps in the hall. I froze, staring at the bedroom door as the handle began to turn. Slowly, deliberately. Then it stopped. Silence. I waited for what felt like hours before daring to open it. The hallway was empty, except for a trail of wet footprints leading toward the stairs. I followed them down to the living room. The front door was open again, rain pouring in. Outside, near the edge of the hill, I saw her. A figure in white, standing motionless in the storm. "Hello," I called, my voice shaking. She turned, slowly, like someone hearing a sound underwater. Her face was pale, her hair plastered to her skin, her eyes dark and distant. For a second I thought she might speak. Instead, she raised one hand and pointed toward the creek. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled. And she was gone. I stood there for a long time, rain soaking through my clothes, staring into the darkness where she'd stood. The next morning I went to the creek. The air was cold, sharp, and still smelled of rain. The water ran clear, rippling over the rocks. I searched along the bank until I saw something half buried in the mud, a piece of fabric, white and brittle with age. I dug carefully, and beneath it, found bones. Human bones. I called the sheriff. The investigation lasted weeks. They found not one but 3 bodies buried near the creek, all matching the ages of the Langley family. The husband was never found. When the sheriff returned my call, he told me quietly, "You did the right thing calling us. But you might want to find another place to stay for a while." I left the house that night and checked into a motel. For days, I couldn't sleep, replaying the image of that pale woman pointing toward the creek. She hadn't wanted to hurt me. She'd wanted to be found. 2 weeks later, the sheriff called again. They had found something else, an old journal buried near the cellar. It belonged to William Langley, the father. The last entry was dated the night before the family vanished. They told me to give her back. Said she was theirs. I didn't listen. Now they've come for us. I hear them outside, whispering my name. That was the final line. I returned once more before selling the property, not to stay, but to say goodbye. The new owners, a couple from out of state, had already begun cleaning up the place. The cellar door had been sealed shut, the creek fenced off. As I walked through the empty rooms one last time, I felt that familiar chill, but it wasn't menacing anymore. It was almost grateful. At the window overlooking the creek, I whispered, "You can rest now." For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the glass, a reflection of a woman smiling faintly before fading into the morning light. It's been 3 years since then. I live back in the city now, surrounded by noise and life. But sometimes, when the nights grow quiet and the rain begins to fall, I think about the house on Hollow Creek Road. I think about the whispers, the footprints, the letters written in trembling hands. And I wonder, did I free them, or did I just wake them up? Either way, I've learned something the city could never teach me. Some houses don't just hold memories, they hold witnesses.